Now, when we talk about supervision, we tend to really fantasize it in many ways. And of course, supervision, as I said again, is a very important aspect of practice. But I think the problem here is trying to fantasize it as the magic solution to practice, and that whenever supervision is happening, everything will be fine, and the worker will develop the skills, and they will be safe, they will have mentoring, and we get to miss a really important aspect. And if you look at the textbooks around supervision, they are all written in that way that they don't acknowledge the fact that supervision can actually hinder practice in many ways. Think about that. Think about how supervision can end up being, an area of control, or just even a space for bullying. So we have this study conducted in Australia, really a report published by some colleagues, Porter and their colleagues, highlighting that in Australia in 2016, 62% of cases of bullying in workplaces were identified as perpetrated by supervisors. Think about that. So we don't very much acknowledge this, but actually, supervision, if it's not well managed, it can be problematic, it can hinder practice, it can be stressful, and it can be a space for bullying and harassment and even violence at work. So, as we started saying, there are power differentials really characterizing supervision. And whenever, we don't manage these properly and ethically, those get to position the supervisor as the unquestioned expert. And that in itself can be problematic because it ends up silencing the practitioners. And it discourages you simply to have a normal and honest and respectful conversation with your supervisor. So in that case, you can no longer discuss about the mistakes you made because you feel like you'll be either fired from your work or questioned or judged. And it just creates a toxic workplace where you can't really have, somebody to rely on to improve your work. So supervision also becomes problematic and can actually hinder practice when it's inadequate. And what I mean by inadequate supervision here, those supervision meetings which are simply rushed or cancelled, or not really meeting your needs as a supervisee, which tend to be very infrequent. You've seen supervisors who only meet you when there are problems and who never check in to know how things are going. Supervisors who are purely administrative and who are only interested in, things to do with maybe grants application, but nothing to do with actually the work happening itself. So there are many shortcomings really related to supervision, and which can make supervision in itself become problematic to your work. And you really need to take it with caution, and make sure that whoever is supervising you, you are getting along with them and doing your work properly. But also yourself, if you become a supervisor, make sure that whatever you are doing with your supervisees is actually supporting practice instead of hindering practice. So supervision, which is purely prescriptive, which is protocol-driven supervision, always just, ticking the boxes so that at least we shall have documentation that this worker has been having supervisions when actually there is nothing serious happening in those supervision meetings. All these, again, really can constrain professional judgment and can actually hinder professional development among workers. Really important considerations for us to think about. Now, some conditions actually make supervision helpful. Supervision really is an element of social work, happens in context. And this context is a context of relationship. Yes, a relationship with your supervisor, and that should be built on trust. That should be built on respect. That should be built on psychological safety, so that as a supervisor, you can be able to open up and reflect on, what's happening in your practice instead of feeling like you are being constantly judged, constantly scrutinized to the point that you can't even open up and discuss about what's happening in your practice. In my own roles, I've felt like supervision has been helpful also whenever there were clarities on the roles and whenever I was told what the goals of my supervisions were and the purpose of this supervision and even the expectations. Whenever all these are discussed with transparency, and you feel like they really align with the organizational and the professional standards, then it's more likely that the supervision, you will find it really helpful. So again, as I said, supervision happens in an organizational context, and the organizational culture we discussed in week 2 will be very important here. Workplaces which value supervision and which allocate specific time for that to happen. I think those tend to be quite supportive, as we said in week 2, and you'll find that really helpful in making the most out of your supervision meetings. Also, supervision which balances authority with collaboration, supervision which tends to draw from the different functions of supervision which doesn't only lean towards education and forgets about the admin and the supportive aspect of supervision. I think those are core aspects and core conditions which really make supervision helpful among workers. So what else can you add on these specific conditions which make supervision helpful? Think about what's happening in your practice. Think about what you are already doing with your supervisor and which you feel like these are the aspects which are really making supervision something helpful in my practice and my career. Thank you very much. I hope you find these brief lectures helpful. See you soon.